Sport 24 chief writer Rob Howing is with us in studio to give us a recap of some of the big results from the weekend and talking points. Rob, thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Morning, Nick.
First of all, some good news, which we can touch on a bit later, the Blitzbox. Something to be proud of for South Africans, winning the World Series and the icing on the cake, winning the Paris title. But in the 15-man game, Super Rugby, South African teams, there was a win for the Lions. But otherwise, the local derby between the Sharks and the Kings was very topical. You wrote a column about it. The Kings, their resurgence again with another win, and giving Saru a bit of a headache when it comes to the reduction of South African sides in next year's tournament.
Yes, it's like sort of square peg round hole sort of scenario. Just at the time that everybody's saying, well, the Kings and the Cheetahs are fait accompli to be the two teams who will have to be ditched from a South African point of view. Along come the Kings saying, hold on a second, chaps, delay the burial. We have no plans to sort of die, sort of belly up. They've now gone 3 games with wins. One of them was against the Waratahs, the 2014 champions in Australia. Say what you like about the Waratahs these days, that still takes a fair bit of doing. They then thrashed the Rebels 44-3, which tells you the Rebels ain't too great shakes, and what is their future in Super Rugby. And then of course cherry on top was this one. It was their first win in I think 19 derby attempts. Remember, this is the 3rd season effectively of the Kings being in Super Rugby. In 2013 and 2016 they couldn't get any derby wins. They hadn't up to this point. So it was actually a real milestone victory. And the really pleasing thing was that there was a good crowd, which is exactly one way of saying, look, we want to stay in Super Rugby, is if you can show that you can get into a little bit of a winning way and draw crowds back. Some of their crowds have been absolutely pitiful, and all of a sudden they've gone a little bit of a roll, and what happens? The people come back. So it is creating a massive dilemma. I mean, Saru must be almost hating them, not quite the right word, but you know what I'm saying. It's almost an inconvenience that they are now doing so well, and creating certainly a major dilemma for this whole thing of tightening up Super Rugby, which I think most of us agree needs to be tightened up. But the question now to be asked is, are they actually targeting the correct sides? And is South Africa almost being too generous in being prepared to ditch 2 South African sides, because we'd be losing 2 of our 6. That's a big drop, and frankly the Australian challenge is looking awful. So do we really deserve to lose 2 sides? That is now suddenly become quite a flashpoint.
And I think particularly what seems with the current form of the Bulls, traditionally a strong team, a team that's won the title twice, but really are pitiful at the moment. So in that context, Rob, I mean, it's probably going to turn into a bit of a tense political argument, I foresee.
Yes, it will, and of course we know that politics plays a role in the presence of the Kings anyway. They are seen as a sort of a strong sort of transformation bastion in South Africa, and with good merit. I mean, there are a lot of really good young black players coming to the fore now, so it does seem desperately disappointing that they may well have to go and find other homes, if they can get them, of course. It has created a real sort of dilemma. The one thing we've got to be careful of, Nick, is not to be too knee-jerk about these things. You can't judge the presence of teams just based on, say, 2 or 3 weeks of good results. Some people would say that the Kings are almost punching from the grave. That they sort of know that they've gone, so that they can relax, nothing to lose. And how would they be doing if they were still a guaranteed presence? I'm not trying to sort of argue against them. I'm just saying that you've got to keep those things into account. The Bulls, as you say, I mean, pretty wretched in the last few weeks. Having said that, they were their own worst enemies against the Highlanders. They actually were just beginning to turn the screws in that foul weather, chilly, cold, wet weather at Loftus. Very unusual conditions at Loftus. And it looked as though they were actually going to grind out a win against the Highlanders, which would have been quite a morale booster. But then an absolute moment of madness from Ergir Snyman, where he goes in for a reckless clean-out. The Bulls get a try disallowed late on, and there's a 7-point swing the other way, and the Highlanders go and win it. So the fact remains the Bulls are in the doldrums. But they're also they are 3-time champions. They are South Africa's lone winners of Super Rugby. So do you suddenly sort of say, oh, the Bulls are rubbish now, let's chop them from the competition? I'm not so sure. I still think that the main metropolises in South Africa have got to have Super Rugby teams. I've been banging this drum for a while. Cape Town, Durban, Pretoria, Johannesburg. I think if you're only going to have 4 teams, if it's only going to be statutorily allowed that there are 4 teams, that SANZAR says South Africa can only have four sides, then I still think those 4 metropolises, with their sort of bigger economic clout and everything, have to be in the mix. So it's a very, very difficult scenario. The ideal situation would be to keep 5. I think the real win for South Africa would be keep those big 4 metropolises and be able to somehow hang on to the Kings.